Stormy the night, and the waves roll high. Bravely the ship doth ride. Hark, while the lighthouse bell's solemn cry rings over the sullen tide. There on the deck, see two lovers stand, heart to heart beating and hand to hand. Though death be near, she knows no fear, while at her side is one of all most dear. Loudly, the bell in the old tower rings, bidding us list to the warning it brings. Sailor, take care. Sailor, take care. Danger is near thee. Beware, beware. Many brave hearts are asleep in the deep. So beware, beware. Many brave hearts are asleep in the deep. So beware, beware.
Hello and welcome to The Bad Spot and part 10 of the Last Starmarked, my Sundered Isles campaign. At the top of the episode you will have heard an excerpt from the sea shanty Asleep in the Deep, read by the wonderful Liz Campbell. Liz has been playing games for the better part of 2 decades, and it means the world that her friends still want to play with her. And you can hear Liz playing games with those friends as a regular cast member over at Realms of Peril and Glory. And if you want to do that, and I strongly advise you do, you will find all the links in the down below. And whilst I have you, why don't you leave a like, subscribe, and click the little bell icon so you can follow along with the campaign each and every week. Now, here at The Bad Spot, we recently ticked past the 6,000 subscriber landmark, and I would very much like to try and push to 7,000 subscribers this year if possible. Now, YouTube tells me that most of you aren't subscribed, and I, for one, believe them. So I think you should just do the decent thing and click the button now. Go on, now. These things are really important for supporting the channel and supporting what I do, and if you really want to help and actually fund this nonsense, then why not check out the Bad Spot Patreon. There you'll get early, ad-free access to all episodes, exclusive behind-the-scenes content, and your name on screen like these lovely people. Last time out, we caught up with the aftermath of the explosive events at Crown Falls. We see the last few remaining dock workers combing the wreckage for survivors, where Finn is found barely alive. And we also catch up with Governess McCabe as she learns what happened at the docks from a secret message carried by Seagull. Meanwhile, out on the open ocean, Gideon is starting to come to terms with the predicament he's in. Forced by circumstance to impersonate the captain of the perilous venture, the Griffin Academy research vessel on a dangerous voyage to the cursed Isle of Navini. As the ship crosses the Amber Strait, Gideon acquaints himself with the ship's first mate, May Harrington, whose unusually formal attire stands out amongst the more functionally dressed crew. He is suspicious of her, but that suspicion appears to be mutual, and she makes no secret that she is dubious of his credentials. Gideon also observes that the ship appears to have lost a good deal of its supplies in the attack at the docks, and also notes that armed security guards appear to outnumber sailors on this voyage, leading him to believe that whatever this mission actually is, it is incredibly dangerous. Gideon finally spends some time looking at the secret briefing that he carries in the ledger that he stole from the Navigator's Lodge. Inside, he finds maps and drawings laying out the mission's goal, to return the Crown of Tides to Navini. And this is confusing because Gideon is in possession of the actual Crown of Tides, leading him to question just what is under armed guard below decks. As he ponders what all this means, he is interrupted by a tapping at the window, and he turns to see a seagull, which he knows comes bearing word from the ebb tide. So that was a lot of information last time, and I think that means we've got some progress to mark. Like, we swore an iron vow to Finn to finish their mission and return the Crown of Tides to Navini, and we've now learned that this expedition that we're on actually has the exact same goal, which is confusing and raises a lot of questions, but I think it still definitely counts as gaining valuable insight, so we will mark progress on our vow to return the Crown of Tides. Now, I don't think we have any progress to mark on our background vow, and we definitely don't have any progress to mark on our vow to find Felicity, and God knows when we'll get back to that. We might have to put a pin in that for a while. But anyway, now we are up to date with all of that. Let's begin. And I say let's begin, but I actually want to start this episode with something sort of like away from the fiction, something that is a little more big picture, more geopolitical. And I don't know if it's because I've been playing a lot of Blades in the Dark recently, but I feel like we need to check in on the factions at play in the Ember Strait, because the last time we did this was in Session 0, and let's have a look. We established two factions, the League of Smoke and Steel and the Ebb Tide, and the relationship between the two was very simple. We said the Ebb Tide were manoeuvring against the League of Smoke and Steel. Now we're in episode 10, did I say? Yeah, our 10th episode, and we've folded quite a few more factions into the story, and I would like to update this faction relationship map because I feel like it needs to be plotted out, because it's become a little more complex than the last time we checked in on it. So Gideon is deeply embroiled in all this, so he's here at the centre. He wasn't even on this map at the beginning, but now he is tangled up in this knot, and it's going to be very difficult for him to untie it and extricate himself. So he's an agent of the Ebb Tide. You know, he's been recruited by Governess McCabe, and the Ebb Tide are still manoeuvring against the League of Smoke and Steel. Now, Felicity Devereaux is working for the League of Smoke and Steel. Gideon's pursuing Felicity, and I'm not really sure what the relationship is the other way, so I'll kind of leave that blank, because Felicity is I think, so bloody minded and singular in her goal and her purpose that I don't think that she would have even reported what happened at Whitlock Manor to her superiors. And in actual fact, thinking back to what happened in the episode after the kind of incident at Whitlock Manor, Governess McCabe staged an execution of the person who was said to have caused the trouble at the party, as after kind of she arrested Gideon in Port Emblyn. And so for all intents and purposes, Felicity, if she's been keeping an eye on things, thinks that Gideon's dead. Anyway, the League of Smoke and Steel, through the actions of Felicity, as she stole the blue flame, this mysterious blue flame, they are now at war with the Circle of Silent Hands. And I'm going to start a campaign clock, and I'm going to have it in the background just kind of ticking away. I'm going to make it a 6-segment clock, and I'm just going to call it Retribution. Because there has to be payback for this, right? There has to be. Like, the Circle of Silent Hands were going all out for Felicity in Crown Falls. They dispatched, a ton of manpower to hunt her down. So I think it stands to reason that after how that ended with more death and destruction, that they would intensify that search for her. Now, in terms of other factions, we started a dock worker uprising in Crown Falls, and I think that should Gideon ever return there, he might never, he may do, I have no idea, but if he does, I think he would probably be treated quite favourably. And despite the devastating effect that the uprising had, the dockers have regained control of the port from the military, so that is very much something I feel. And finally, we have the night ships, who were rolled up in the live episode as, a fun kind of cursed result. But they have now found their way into the campaign. And for anyone who needs a refresher, the night ships are dread ships of the vampire clans, shrouded in an eternal gloom. Their undead crews leave wrecks and blood-drained corpses in their wake. Now, all we know about them right now is that they are after the Crown of Tides, and Gideon had a little bit of a run-in with their captain, Esmeralda O'Rourke, in the live episode. Now, whether she is still in play is unknown, because all we know outside of these basic details, which are from the factions of the Isles Oracle in the Sundered Isles book, we know that Finn mentioned something about their power being diminished. So, that's all we know. But in terms of relationships they have to other factions, they are hunting for the crown specifically, which means that effectively they are hunting Gideon. And I think that might be it for now, but you can see that just from 8-9 sessions of play, we have fleshed out the factions of our world in some quite interesting ways. And I really like that. I think it adds depth to what's going on and gives us things to think about that are kind of playing out in the background. But anyway, thanks for indulging me on that detour. But I kind of think I needed it, and it's good to kind of keep everyone abreast of it. So, where were we? Gideon Finch is trying his hardest to encourage a seagull to enter his cabin. Now, the bird is stubborn, and it is noisily protesting against any efforts he's making. Gideon tries to kind of grab the obstinate bird, and every time he goes for it, it kind of pecks angrily at him. And Lorenzo is watching this scene unfold from the comfort of the captain's chair, and he's finding this pantomime incredibly funny, and squealing with glee each time Gideon is on the receiving end of a sharp beak. But eventually, I think Gideon manages to kind of wrestle one of the bird's legs and kind of pull free the message that has been sent to him. And he kind of backs off and puts some distance between him and the belligerent bird, and he unrolls this piece of yellow wax paper, and he reads. But it's obviously encrypted, right? It has to be, because the ebb tide aren't dummies. And kind of Gideon was hoping they were. He's very disappointed to learn that there is this encryption in play, because he would very much appreciate having everything explained to him right now, because he's sort of kind of grasping at straws at the moment. He is kind of at sea and could do with a guiding hand. So if it's encrypted, how do we crack a cipher in-game? So to be clear, the text of this message is garbled. It's a mixture of symbols and numbers. It makes no sense at all. It's not like you can just replace the vowels around and it suddenly makes sense. It's high level spycraft, right? So I was kind of thinking, in game, how do we go about mechanically doing that? Because there's no move that triggers when you're puzzle solving. This isn't also risky or dangerous, and I did initially, when I was kind of thinking about how this episode would play out, think about doing this as a scene challenge, because I like having the countdown clock and kind of counting down to figuring it out, but neither really Face Danger or Secure an Advantage feel like the right move, and overall a scene challenge doesn't kind of feel like the right thing. So then I started thinking that maybe Gather Information, which I think text as written is probably the closest thing to the right move here. But what I've realized is that the solution to this is kind of just to frame the fiction a little differently. And this happens sometimes in this game when no moves seem to kind of fit. And when it does, and when it is now, I would always advise just taking kind of a step back and try and reframe what you're doing. And in this case, I'm doing that because not only is there no obvious mechanical move that would help us do this, but it's just weird for Gideon to just crack a code, right? Because he's got no proficiency in like code breaking, and I don't mean like big P proficiency. Like, you know, we have never really talked about that before, and it's not really part of his character as I've been playing him. And if it was, then I'd probably just have him do this without a move if he had some kind of like innate talent at cracking things or solving puzzles. So what actually makes more sense here, now I've kind of thought about it, is that like there is no code or cipher to learn. What there is the recipient of these messages. And in this case, it feels like it's Captain Burke who's received this message. They have an object, and that object is in this cabin that allows them to read encrypted messages, because that's how it works, right? There's this maybe a thing that they can hold over the message written in such a way. Maybe they kind of the way turn it and something focuses on all the letters and kind of reveals the message, or in essence, like, you know, kind of cracks that code. And if that's true, then the move becomes about finding the code breaking device rather than cracking the code. So it's all about taking a step back and reframing the move using the fiction. So yeah, anyway, that's just irrelevant, kind of. But welcome to another episode of Show Your Working with Matt Risby. After all that, we're going to just search the cabin, I guess, for whatever this device is. I'll charitably say that whatever it is going to be kind of obvious that that's what it is. But that holds the key to unlocking the message and probably going forward all messages. So we're going to do that with the move Secure an Advantage, which says, when you assess a situation, make preparations or attempt to gain leverage, envision your action and roll. And I think this is going to be with observation, because we're kind of looking for something. So let's secure an advantage. Rolling plus wits. Okay, that is a miss, and momentum is no use to us here, so let's just eat that. It says on a miss you fail, or your assumptions betray you and pay the price. So the immediate issue here is like we can't find the thing, right? Like whatever it is, we can't find it. Gideon and Lorenzo are tearing the place apart, looking for it, and they just don't turn anything up that even could be it. Like there's nothing there. And I think that after that initial burst of, you know, thinking that it has to be in here somewhere, like it becomes very obvious to Gideon that like he actually had no idea what he was looking for. Like he has genuinely no idea how to do this. And I think he feels incredibly lost and kind of a bit stupid that Captain Burke would just leave a code cracking device just hanging on the wall or like on his desk. But that also actually brings up an interesting point, like out of character, obviously, because there's no way that Gideon has figured this out, what I'm about to say. But like he's been inducted into the ebb tide, or deputized more specifically, I guess. And like he's not been given one of these devices that helps him decrypt messages, right? Like, so whoever has sent him that message would know that. So Sabrina McCabe, if this message is from her, would know that he doesn't have a way of like decrypting it. So if the message is encrypted, then can we assume that it's not actually for him? And if that's the case, like who is it for? And I think that is our pay the price here. Like that is a really good narrative twist. I think that as Gideon and Lorenzo are looking for this thing, whatever it is that will try and help them crack the code, like in the background, we see the seagull just still there in the window, and they don't notice, but we see a pair of hands reach in and pull the seagull out of sight. So that's an interesting development. That would imply that there is perhaps another agent of the ebb tide on the ship, or maybe there is someone else that is antagonistic towards the ebb tide. Could we assume from what happened that Captain Burke was the intended recipient? Could it have been someone else? Has the person who has just grabbed the seagull, are they the intended recipient of the message? In which case, they've got a bird with no message attached to it, and Gideon has a message that he can't read. So I think that is a very appropriate price to pay, because it just dials up the stakes and makes things quite a lot worse, I think. It's just an extra problem on Gideon's ever-growing pile of problems, I guess. So, without being able to read the message, which he keeps, what are we doing? What's Gideon got to do? Now, we know from the last episode he has to brief his crew. He's read the mission briefing and he needs to pass that on to the key members of the crew. And I think that, having thought about what that's going to look like, that's going to boil down to him kind of presenting the information to the senior crew members. And it's all the information that's from that mission, documentation that he's been reading. He doesn't have to come up with a plan. He just has to kind of present it in a convincing way, and we'll keep that in mind for when we actually have that scene later. But right now, I think that if he can't find this thing that helps him translate these messages, and he's got a while to the briefing, I think the thing that he's going to want to focus on is the thing that's on his desk, in front of him. It's wrapped in Finn's cloak. It's the Crown of Tides, plus the decapitated head that's still in it. Because, remember, we've just found out that this is the point of this mission, and that's a very puzzling development. And I maybe didn't do a particularly good job of setting it up last time because I was trying to be kind of dramatic. But to be clear, down in the hold, we can presume under armed guard is what the documentation says is the Crown of Tides. And we know that isn't the case. And Gideon knows that isn't the case. And what this points at, and this is the thing that's kind of fizzing through Gideon's mind, that he knows that when they went to Fool's Rest, which is where he and Finn reclaimed the crown, we know that some criminals brought the crown to Fool's Rest, and then they kind of headed into the Warren, which is where the big fight went down, and Finn and Gideon reclaimed it. Now, those criminals, and this is what Gideon's thinking, and this is, I think, probably correct, those criminals, led probably by the person whose head is still wrapped up in this cloak, wearing the crown, they probably switched it out when they stole it. They didn't just take it. They put in a facsimile, and whatever is now under guard in the hold below decks is a fake. It's a forgery. And I think that Gideon, to confirm that, I think he's going to need to see it. But first, I think he's going to want to have a look at the original. So he's sat there, he's kind of frustrated from not being able to find the magic cipher cracking device. And I think he considers it just downright rude that someone didn't just leave it in a drawer clearly labelled code breaking device. So he's kind of very down at heart about this and slumps down into the captain's chair. And on the desk, he has all these papers spread out which are depicting things to do with the mission, including depicting the crown. And they're all sat next to this bundle of fabric. It's the cloak that has in it the real Crown of Tides, still being worn by the last person foolish enough to put it on. And Gideon grabs the bundle, and it stinks, right, of blood and brine. And Lorenzo kind of recoils and scuttles off the desk as Gideon starts to slowly unwrap it. And as he does, we see that it's fairly horrifying up close. We can see the detail because remember we kind of described the wearer becoming fused with the crown when he put it on, and the coral shards of the crown. I don't know what they're called. The kind of things, prongs, I guess. Like they grew up, but they also like bore down through the skull, and we can see now from this decapitated head that eyes are still covered, and those shards have come through the roof of their mouth, sticking out like these weird, elongated coral fangs. And Gideon notices now that the head has kind of shrunken a bit, and maybe as it's kind of like been removed from the owner's shoulders, that like, you know, it's started to kind of recede a little. And I think Gideon holds it by those prongs that I won't look up and lifts it. And as he does, I think the head sort of just slops out onto the table. And Gideon kind of jumps up from the chair and he's, yeah, it's kind of disgusting. And he kind of puts the crown to one side and he picks up the head. And he's just kind of walking it across the captain's cabin over to the open window, and he kind of checks very briefly before he kind of just yeets it like out into the sea. I think, yeah, if you were keeping an eye on this window from outside, you've seen a seagull being wrestled with by a man. Then shortly afterwards, the seagull gets taken away, and then a guy throws a decapitated head into the sea. It's gross. It's a bad look. But yeah, he now, free of the head, which is, convenient, I think. He's now just got the crown, and it's sat on his desk, and he returns and sits in the chair, and it's sort of changed. I think it looks a little smaller. The kind of the prongs have receded, even though like they couldn't have done. Maybe Gideon thinks possibly he was perhaps kind of too grossed out by the head to have noticed. But then he also kind of sees that the coral that makes it now starts to look a bit brighter, a bit healthier and alive. It's no longer imbued with that ghostly spectral blue that it had before. And Gideon's just kind of like holding it in his hands, and he's looking at it, and it's kind of beautiful. It's kind of beguiling. And as he's kind of losing himself in looking at this beautiful thing, this powerful artifact, he can kind of start to hear the sound of the deep. He can kind of hear that dampened kind of like hollowness of being underwater. And he just kind of stares at it. And then Lorenzo just kind of slaps him around the back of the head, and he kind of snaps out of it, suddenly kind of aware of himself, kind of a little bit embarrassed, and he wraps it up again. And now it's smaller. I think that it will fit in like a satchel, maybe kind of beside his bunk. There's a satchel hanging there. And he can kind of wrap it in this cloak and put it in there and walk around, and it doesn't look quite as obvious. And I think that Gideon is now going to have to go and look at what's being kept below decks. But before he does, I think he needs to get changed. Like, I'm going to be very charitable and say that Captain Burke was a very good fit for Gideon in the sense of like clothes, as luck would have it, because I don't want to have to keep rolling to get clothes. That would be a pain. I think narratively we'll just give the guy a break. And I think that Gideon, searches through the wardrobe and puts together like a pretty good outfit for someone who is trying to look like a captain. He has these kind of white breeches and these black boots and a tunic over which there is this lovely navy blue overcoat with these gilded buttons which bear the emblem of the Griffin Academy. And he sweeps back his blonde hair and just kind of pulls on a tricorn hat, and he fixes it straight in the mirror. And do you know what? I think he's making this work. And, I think that goes a long way to make him feel more comfortable in this lie. Like, he looks the part. That's a big part of convincing himself that he's able to play the part as well. So he takes the satchel with the crown from the peg and slings it over his shoulder. And he pauses at the door, takes a breath to compose himself. Lorenzo joins him, scampers up his leg and onto his shoulder. Let's go below decks. And as soon as he steps out of the cabin and steps out onto the deck, he finds First Mate Harrington alongside him, marching with him, matching his purposeful stride, step for step. And she says, "Should we expect that briefing soon, Captain?" And Gideon, trying to hide his frustration, says, "All in good time, Harrington." And she says, "But, Captain, we need to chart a course, or at least know what the course is. We need to bolster our provisions. We need..." And he stops. And he says, "All in good time, Harrington. Now I need to go below deck to attend to some vital business, if that is amenable to you, of course." And Harrington is kind of really biting her tongue. Like, she was clearly probing, kind of testing him. And he's just kind of like put a stop to it, put up a hard boundary and shut her down. And she just says, "As you wish, sir." And she salutes and leaves. And like, Gideon doesn't want to be mean to her because, as we stated before, he kind of digs her. But like, this is completely necessary to sell the illusion. But he's playing a part of a captain with important things to do. But I think this little exchange that they had actually showed to us perhaps that, well, it showed to us more than Gideon, that Harrington is like persistent and she takes her job very seriously, and she's still suspicious of Gideon's command. And again, she's right to be, because he's an imposter. So Gideon continues on across the deck and reaches the hatch that leads down into the hold. And that hatch is guarded by 8 heavy-set, hulking brutes, and they're all part of the security detail, and they've each got muskets and pistols and an array of gnarly hand-to-hand weapons. And Gideon is really careful not to look intimidated and just says, "Now, I appreciate you doing your jobs and all, but would you mind terribly standing aside?" And there's very little change in expression or even any recognition that, like, he's spoken to them. And that is until one of the guards just simply steps aside and pulls the door open. And Gideon says, "Thank you kindly." And he starts down the short set of steps into the bowels of the ship. So down here, it's sort of dark and cramped, and there's all sorts of boxes that are kind of piled up, and they're marked as holding field supplies, emergency rations, overland travel gear, all that kind of stuff. And they're kind of stacked up on like either side of him, and it kind of forms this it forms this corridor kind of through the middle of the hold. And it's not a huge cavernous hold. This is a big ship, but it's not huge, the hold. And down this corridor, kind of at the end of it, is a chest, a large metal chest that's just kind of on the floor. And either side of that are 2 more guards, equally as ugly and equally as well armed as the ones above deck. And as Gideon approaches, the 2 guards see him, and they stand their rifles off to the side, and each of them takes out a key. And as Gideon gets close to the chest, they kind of look him over before they turn, and they each put their key into a lock that's on either end of the chest. And it's at this point that Gideon notices 2 more guards kind of positioned up on the boxes up high, who have got rifles trained on him, and he isn't turning around, but he will assume that there are 2 more behind. The guards turn their keys, and there is this heavy clunk and crunch, and then We see kind of clockwork gears on the outside of this chest start to turn, parts of the chest shift and click into place. Lorenzo peers down from Gideon's shoulder, eagerly looking as the chest pops open and the lid lifts up. And the guards turn their backs and let Gideon look inside. And there, in the chest, is a large crown made of ragged shards of coral, and that, to Gideon's eye, is all it is. It's perhaps what someone would make or craft if they'd been told a story about the Crown of Tides and what it does without ever having actually seen it or seen a picture of it. And if you'd never seen it, then it would probably pass muster. But Gideon knows different, and he clasps the satchel a little tighter. And Gideon knows the true crown and its power, its magnificence, its beauty, and this is a pale, lifeless imitation. He can feel himself becoming a little angry, a little insulted even. This is a sham of a thing before him. It is nothing in comparison. And then Lorenzo slaps him around the back of the head again and shakes him out of it. And having done this twice now, I feel like you're getting the picture. I'm gonna start another clock. And yes, this is a clock-heavy episode, I know. But I'm gonna start an 8-segment clock, and I'm gonna name it The Call of the Crown. And I think that when this clock gets filled, whoever is holding it is going to put it on. And I'm going to fill the first segment right now. And this isn't a scene challenge or anything. This isn't a campaign clock. But it gives me something to spend complications on if they're appropriate. And I know this is only kind of sort of in the Starforged rules, but I did say I have been playing a lot of Blades in the Dark recently. And I actually think that using a clock here would be a really good way to represent this artifact's power mechanically and also help crank up some tension. So let's hope I don't instantly forget this and I keep kind of filling it out. But I think also, like, confirming that the crown that is in the hold is definitely a fake, I think that is meaningful insight. So I think we can mark progress on our vow, which takes us up to 2 out of 10. Gideon nods to the guards to close the chest, and they do. And the snipers up on the crates lower their weapons, and he leaves. Now, I think we're going to kind of hard cut here because I can't think of anything extra I have to do. I've kind of had all the little scenes that I want to have. So I think we're just going to cut straight to the briefing. And the briefing is happening like a bit later, and it's happening in the captain's quarters. I think that's where this would happen. And I think Gideon is standing in front of a board with, like, the map is kind of pinned on it, and there's some other bits, like some of those illustrations, but there's none of the classified stuff that's either been burnt already or is just kind of not included. And like I said, the point of this briefing is to give an overview of the mission. Like, there are going to be certain details that are for his eyes only, but the rest of the crew need to know some stuff. So at the table, who have we got? We have got what is the senior crew. And remember that Gideon was the only one of 6 Griffin Academy members who made it on board. So we can assume that there are some people here that ordinarily wouldn't be in a mission briefing like this and are probably acting up above their station. We've got Harrington's there, trying as hard as she can not to look incredulous. We have the quartermaster there, who we saw checking the supplies. Also, there is the navigator, and we would have the ship's surgeon there probably. And I think that all those people would have been there no matter what. But on top of that, we've got some extra members of the crew who wouldn't have ordinarily been there, including probably the bosun. We've got the equivalent of what would be the ship's chaplain. And then I don't know which is more appropriate, but like either like the gunner or the armorer, probably pulling double duty here. Someone who's in charge of all the cannons and stuff, but also arming the crew for the overland expedition. So it's a small group. And I think that we join them just as Gideon has laid out the mission in very general terms. But he is about to deliver a key part of information. And he pulls back a map beneath the one that he's already shown. And it's a more kind of close-up of Navini and says, "Now our final approach into Navini will be dangerous. Now, I personally don't want to add this ship's name to the list of vessels lost sailing this passage, so we are taking a different tack." And this new map, shows a different route plotted on it, and the route is taking a longer way around to the far coast of the island. And he says, "As you can see, we'll be extending our approach, bypassing the southern cape and looking to drop anchor just off the island's western coast. We believe this gives us the best chance of success and will enable us to row ashore and make our way to the interior. Any questions?" And now we're going to make a move, because the crew are going to do this. We're going to go through with this. We're not going to have a mutiny on board. They're going to go through with the mission. But we're going to roll to see how they feel about it. And Gideon is doing a very good job of looking like he knows what he's talking about, but do the crew buy it? So this move is compel, which says when you try to persuade someone or make them an offer, envision your approach. And we are fibbing. This is a big fat pork pie. So we can absolutely use our scoundrel asset, which is getting rinsed, and I assume will backfire at some point. You just know that's going to happen. So let's compel. Rolling plus shadow. Not today. On a strong hit, they'll do what you want or agree to your conditions. Take +1 momentum. So that little bump takes us up to 8 momentum. So the crew, I think, perhaps with the exception of Harrington, look convinced, I think, and better than that, maybe look emboldened by this different approach, I guess. They don't know if it'll succeed, but they know nothing has before, and maybe that's enough for them to then go about their business and perhaps microdose some optimism amongst the crew. So I also think this is progress. We have earned vital support here by bringing the crew on side. So we can mark progress and take that up to 3 out of 10. We are off to the races. The crew are on side. We have a clear goal and we have a method with which to pursue it. What could possibly go wrong? Well, one thing could go wrong, because it sure feels a lot like a lot of time has passed, and it could be nighttime by now. And if it's nighttime, then we need to see what the Twin Fates are doing. Remember, if Wraith is full, we are going to see Gideon's curse kick in, and all this will be a moot point, and we're all going to die. So let's roll and see what we got. Okay, so it's actually Cinder that is in the ascendancy again. It's not full, but we will bear in mind the effects that moon might have on the action. So we are kind of on this voyage, right? Now we've established where we're going. I think we need to make a move to get there, right? And I think you could argue that we could just make the move set a course, because set a course is the move you make where you know where you're going, where you've got like a predetermined route. We've got the map, we've got a point A and a point B, but I think this is actually more complicated, and I think this feels worthy of an extended expedition. And looking at the other move you make when you're kind of making a journey, undertake an expedition, we can see it says, when you sail an unfamiliar route through perilous seas, find the way across hazardous terrain, or explore a mysterious site, give the expedition a name and rank. And this new route is definitely unfamiliar, so I think we're going to make this move instead. So let's give this expedition a name and rank. I think it's just going to be called Reach the Cursed Isle of Navini, and I think rank-wise this is going to be dangerous. And it says, for each segment of the expedition, envision your approach. And I think that as weather is kind of fair, we established that earlier on, I think we should make the most of a favourable wind and move quickly. So let's try and cross the Ember Strait at speed. So we will be undertaking an expedition, rolling plus edge. Okay, so on a strong hit, we reach a waypoint and mark progress, but we rolled a weak hit. And a weak hit says as above, but this progress costs you, and choose one. So we've got a choice. We can either suffer costs en route, or we can face a peril at the waypoint. But first, what we'll do is we'll mark progress. So we are up to 2 out of 10 on our journey to reach the Cursed Isle of Navini. And what's going to be our complication? Now, you know I always prefer a narrative complication over a mechanical penalty. You all know this by now. Let's not pretend any different. I am less interested in watching a number go down than I am juicing the story. So, and also there's like a ton of new seafaring oracles in the Sundered Isles book that I want to use. So let's do just that. So what do we come across at this waypoint? Now, we're in known waters, which we're in the margins, aren't we? And that gives us a specific set of parameters. So let's roll. Okay, 60 says lost souls or shipwreck. Ah, wonderful. And you better believe that there are specific, very detailed shipwreck oracles. So let's see what we can see. So first of all, we figure out the location of this shipwreck, and we kind of don't need to because we're at sea. So we'll just pick that one, but we'll figure out its orientation. Okay, let's roll. It is 32 adrift on the surface. And how big is this ship? 77 is large, a frigate or a galleon. Now, let's figure out its, what does it say? Wholeness. So, like, what state is it in? 38 is split in two. Now we can get a first look and find out a bit more about this. But before we do, shall we see if it's cursed? It's cursed. Yeah, that's what we want. So a cursed shipwreck. What's the cursed first look of this shipwreck? And we'll roll twice on this oracle. 63 is scarred by weapons of baneful power. And 16 is engulfed in unnatural mist or murk. Now that is interesting. So let's envision this. Gideon is now satisfied the twin fates won't awaken his curse. And he's been in his quarters for most of the evening. Lorenzo is asleep, snoring away quietly on the bunk. And Gideon is sat at his desk, still trying to make sense of some of the sketches from the documentation. Like, they're so vague. It's hard to tell what some of them are, and no matter what the orientation, he can't seem to figure out. And he knows that they relate to something that can be found in Navini's interior, and that feels like a future Gideon problem. Like, he might not even get that far. So he kind of takes a break and he's sipping from this goblet of wine. And as he does, he is disturbed by the clanging of the lookout's bell. And he gets up quickly and puts his hat and throws his coat on and opens the door. And as he does, like, he finds Harrington, like, in the threshold, poised to knock. And Gideon says, "Are you ever off duty, Harrington?" And with a smile or a smirk, he kind of moves past her. And she follows him and says, "No, like, this is literally my job." And she follows him towards the port side where the rest of the crew are gathered, and they've all got their kind of lanterns held out. They're looking through the murk. The ship has slowed at the sounding of the alarm. And there is this chill in the air, which is unusual for the hour. Gideon joins the others looking out. and there is this deep, dark bank of fog rolling in, and it's one that Gideon finds familiar. Kind of narrows his eyes to see through the gloom, but there's nothing. Silence. The perilous venture has slowed to a nearly complete stop. And then suddenly the silence is broken by the lookout. Incoming! And a figure lunges out of the dark, its face screaming, leering out of the fog. Everyone dives for cover except Gideon and Harrington, who take a step back. But they otherwise remain steadfast, and the two of them stand looking at this figure, which is a figurehead. It is the splintered figurehead of a ship that is sticking out of the water at an unnatural angle, thrusting it towards them. And the figurehead is a woman who ordinarily would be singing, but the fact that half of her face is missing makes this unclear. The prow of the ship to which this figurehead belongs is mostly underwater, and as the perilous venture steers around, we can see the full extent of the damage that's been wreaked upon this vessel. It's cloven in two, as if by a giant blade, severed about 2/3 of the way along its length. The back half is tilting kind of slowly to and fro. The masts have all been broken, the sails have gone. Harrington and Gideon look at each other. She says, "We shouldn't linger here, Captain. This could be a trap." And Gideon is pondering this, never once taking his eyes off the wreck, and he makes a gesture for the crew to wait. And Harrington says, "Captain, I strongly advise," and then she's drowned out. And there is this kind of almighty cacophony. The fog dissipates instantly, and it turns into a screeching column of bats that disappear into the night sky. And as they all watch them leave, the chill seems to fade, and Gideon turns to Harrington and says, "Lash the hull. Prepare to board." Thank you a million times. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe if you've not done so already, and click the little bell icon so you can be notified as soon as the next video drops. I'll be back next time, but until then, it's farewell and safe passage.